Hello. Today we will cover the chapter linear programming. Linear programming is also part of the quantitative techniques of your syllabus, and it has two methods. We will cover both the methods. Let's look at linear programming. Linear programming is a mathematical technique. It is used to determine the optimum mix of available resources when constraints are given. So when you have some resources which are constrained, then what is the optimum mix that I should use to be able to maximize my profits is what is linear programming all about. So linear programming is used to determine the optimum mix of available resources when constraints are given. Objective of minimization or cost or maximization of profit is stated in the question. There are two methods of linear programming, graphical method and simplex method. Let's look at the graphical method. So what are the steps to solve a linear programming problem by graphical method? The first thing that we have to do is we have to formulate the problem into a linear programming problem, an LPP. How do you formulate a problem into an LPP? The first thing is that we have to identify the objective and formulate it into a function, a linear function. So we have to identify what is it that we are trying to achieve, what is it that the objective of the problem is, and formulate it into a linear function. The second is we have to identify the constraints and we have to formulate them into linear functions, linear inequations. So that is those are the two parts of the LPP that we have to formulate. So the first step is formulating the linear programming problem by identifying the objective and constraints and forming them into functions and linear inequations. There is a tip that is given here. In most cases, the variables are positive numbers, and therefore we must remember to write the last constraint as a non-negative constraint. So x and y should be greater than equal to 0, because most of the times the variables cannot be negative. So when that cannot be negative, that is also a constraint which we should factor in our formulation of the linear programming problem. So we should always also write x comma y, or whatever the variables are, should always be greater than equal to 0. Points meeting this will lie only on the first quadrant of the graph. So if you remember the graph, the axis, x-axis and the y-axis, the first quadrant is the only quadrant where you have x also positive and y also positive, and therefore all the points meeting the non-negative criteria would lie only in the first quadrant. So that is just inference out of this constraint. Let's move ahead. The next step is that we have to plot the constraints on the graph. So now we have the LPP formulated, the linear programming problem, and we have inequations, and we have to plot these inequations on the graph. And like we discussed, if they are positive, they are non-negative constraints, then they will always lie in the first quadrant. Then we have to identify the feasible region and the coordinates of the extreme corner points or vertices of the feasible region. So we have to see what is the region as per the function that is feasible. We have to identify that, and we have to identify the extreme points or the corner points. Then we have to test the value of the objective function at each of the identified corner points, and then we have to make our decision based on the above test. So we test the value, we put the values of the corner points in the objective function, and based on that we make our decision. So this is a sum based on the graphical method, what the steps that we've discussed. Let's just do it so that you understand it better. So this is the question. The cost and the selling prices per unit of two products manufactured by a company are as under. There are two products, cost and selling prices are given. Selling price is 500 for product A and 450 for product B. Direct materials 25 rupees per kg, for product A is 100, for product B is 100. Direct labor 20 rupees per hour, for product A is 80, for product B is 40. Painting at 30 rupees per hour, product A is 30, product B is 60. Variable overheads for product A is 190, product B is 175. Fixed costs at 17.5 rupees per direct labor hour is 70 for product A and 35 for product B. Total cost is 470 and 410, and my profit is selling price minus my total cost, which is 30 and 40. So in any month, the maximum availability of inputs is limited to the following. Direct materials, I have only 480 kgs. Direct labor hours, I have only 400 hours. Painting hours, I have only 200 hours. What am I required to do? I am required to formulate a linear program to determine the production plan which maximizes the profits by using the graphical approach. So that is the first question. So the first thing that I have to do is I have to do a contribution analysis, because the question says that I have to maximize profits, and maximizing profits means maximizing contribution. So what I do is I do a contribution analysis. I write down the selling price, total cost per unit, and I just don't put the fixed cost here, and I get the contribution. So my selling price for product A is 500, variable cost is 400, therefore my contribution per unit is 100. Product B, selling price is 450, total cost is 375, and therefore my contribution is 75. So that is contribution per unit of product A and product B. Then the direct material that I need per unit. So for A, it was 100 rupees was the per unit material cost, 25 was the per kg cost. Therefore, I have 100 divided by 25, 4 kg requirement of raw material in 1 unit of product A. Similarly, in product B, I have 4 kg requirement of raw material in 1 unit of product B. Direct labors per unit, we computed in the same manner. 80 rupees was the labor cost per unit, 20 rupees was the per hour cost. So 80 divided by 20 will give me the number of hours required in product A. So per unit of product A requires 80 by 20, 4 hours of direct labor. Similarly, for product B, it is 40 by 20, so 2 hours required for 1 unit of product B. Painting hours per unit. So for product A, I have 30 by 30, which is 1 hour, and for product B, it's 60 by 30, which is 2 hours. So here I have all the per unit consumptions of direct material, direct labor, and painting hours. Let A be the units to be produced of product A. Number of units produced of product A, we are saying, putting that as variable A, and B as the units to be produced of product B. LP problem formulation is what we are going to do now. We have to maximize the contribution. So why are we not talking about profit, and why are we only talking about contribution? Because fixed cost will remain fixed. Maximizing, profit is nothing but contribution minus fixed cost, and profit is always going to remain fixed. So contribution minus fixed cost is as good as maximizing contribution. Hence, our objective is to maximize contribution. 100 rupees per unit is contribution for product A, and variable A is my number of units produced of product A. So 100 into A is the contribution that I am getting from the product A, and 75 is the contribution per unit of B, and B is the number of units that I am going to produce and produce for product B. So 75 into B is my total contribution from product B. So 100A plus 75B is my total contribution from products A and B, and this is what I have to maximize. So I have to maximize 100A plus 75B. Then I have to also formulate the constraints in equations. So there are there is a raw material constraint, there is a direct labor hour constraint, there is a painting hour constraint, and of course there is a non-negativity constraint like we discussed. So raw material or direct material constraint. So each unit of product A and B require 4 kgs of raw material each. Therefore 4A plus 4B should always be less than equal to 480. Direct labor hours also is 4 and 2 it is. So this is a typo. It should be 4A plus 2B less than equal to 400, and painting hour is 1 and 2. So A plus 2B less than equal to 200, and a non-negativity constraint of A comma B greater than equal to 0. This is known as formulating an LPP problem. So this is the formulation of a linear programming problem. Then what we are going to do is we are going to consider the first raw material constraint or the first inequation, which is 4a plus 4b less than equal to 480, and we are going to put b equal to 0 and then we will get 120. It's just like we would solve equations and we put a equal to 0 and we get 120. In the same way we do for direct labor hour, we get a and b as 100 and 200. For painting hour we get a and b as 200 and 100. And we present this graphically. We plot it on the graph. This is the graphical representation. This is how it will look on the graph. So if you see, this line is my a plus 2b, which is the painting hour constraint. A plus 2b less than equal to 200, which is my painting hour constraint, which was 0, 200 and 100, 0. So, 0, 100 and 200, 0. So 200, 0 and 0, 100, and this is my line of a plus 2b less than equal to 200. Similarly, we plot the other constraints as well. This is my 4a plus 4b less than equal to 480, the direct material constraint, and this is my labor constraint. So that is my graphical representation. Now out of these, if you see, these are the extreme points that I have identified: P, Q, R and S. So that is what we have identified. We identified P, Q, R and S as the coordinates 0, 10, 80, 40, 40, 80 and 100, 0. So those are the coordinates. Based on that, I will try to compute my total contribution, and if you see, doing that, I have a maximum contribution at point Q where my contribution is 11,000. Therefore, my optimal product mix is Q. I will produce 80 units of A and 40 units of B. So that is my optimal product mix. So profit at Q is nothing but 11,000 minus, so the 11,000 is my contribution, so I have to deduct my fixed cost of 7,000 from there, and therefore my optimal profit is 11,000 minus 7,000, which is 4,000. So that is the first part of this question. Now let's look at the second part. State the optimal product mix and monthly profit derived from your solution in 1. So from my solution in 1, my so this is the profit and optimal profit and the product mix. Now let's look at the question 3. If the company can sell the painting time at rupees 40 per hour as a separate service, show what modifications will be required in the formulation of the linear programming problem. You are required to only reformulate the problem and not to solve it. So what they are trying to say is that the painting service can be sold externally or as a separate service at 40 rupees per hour. So now how is the LPP formulation going to change? So if the painting time can be sold at rupees 40 per unit, the opportunity cost will be 40 per unit for product A and P from sale of 1 hour. So painting cost per hour is 30 and 30. Opportunity cost becomes 10, 40 minus 10. Since my income from selling this painting service in the external market separately is 40 rupees in 1 hour, my painting cost is 30 rupees. So I have an opportunity cost of 10 rupees per hour over here. If I manufacture product A, I have an painting hour requirement of 1 hour per unit, and for B it is 2 hours per unit. So my opportunity cost per unit of A becomes 10 and my opportunity cost per unit of B becomes 2 hours of the painting hours, 10 into 2, 20. So my revised contribution becomes, my contribution for product A per unit was 100. Now I have to deduct this opportunity cost. So my revised contribution becomes 100 minus 10, 90. And for product B, it becomes 75 minus 20, 55. And therefore, the modification that is required on the objective function, so objective function instead of 100A plus 75B, it will be 90A plus 55B. So that is the reformulated problem. So maximization of 90A plus 55B, and the constraints remain the same. So with that we come to the end of this question, And so that was a question on linear programming to be solved by the graphical method, and we'll do the simplex method in a different lecture. Let's just do 2 theory questions on linear programming. The first one being, what are the practical applications of a linear programming? So the first is that it helps us determine product mix under capacity constraints to minimize costs and maximize profits. So I have a capacity constraint, I have a resource constraint, and I want to still be able to maximize my profits, minimize my costs, and to do this I need to know what is the optimal product mix that I need. What is it that, how much of product A and how much of product B should I produce? And linear programming helps us to determine product mix under these capacity constraints to minimize our costs and maximize our profits. Inventory management, it helps in inventory management to minimize the holding cost, warehousing and transporting cost. So linear programming also helps in minimizing of inventory cost by minimizing the various costs. It also helps in optional blending of raw materials under supply constraints. It helps in portfolio management or receivable management. It helps us understand what is the optimum mix of the portfolio management, what is the portfolio that I should hold in the given constraints. And of course it helps us in assignment of personnel to jobs and resource allocation problems, because it all talks about constraints and how to get an optimal mix out of that. So if we have a resource allocation constraint or a resource allocation problem, then also linear programming is practically applied and used. So that is those are the practical applications of linear programming. Sometimes, very rarely you get a question on this, but it's very simple and easy for you to remember. So you should know them. Just in case you get it, you should be able to write it. The next and the last theory question on linear programming is limitations of linear programming. So what are limitations of linear programming? Limitations are that the objective function and every constraint function in the linear programming problem should be linear. It should be linear in nature. If it is not linear, then you cannot do it. So only if it's linear can you solve the equations like simultaneous equations, or you can basically do something with the equations because they are linear. So the biggest limitation of linear programming is that the objective and the constraint functions must be linear in nature. The second is that many decision problems require solution to be obtained in non-fractional values. So if I get the answer in a fractional value, it's not going to solve my purpose, and rounding of that also may not give me the optimal solution. So therefore many decision problems require solution to be obtained in non-fractional values. Rounding of these fractional values may not result in optimal solution in such cases. Coefficients in the objective function and every constraint function should be completely known. So what are the coefficients? We need to know, and they should not change during the period of stay. So period of study. So these are the limitations of linear programming, and that is all that we have in case of theory of linear programming. We are left with the simplex method, which we will do in a separate lecture. So that is linear programming. Hope you guys are having fun. These are easy portions which you can easily cover and score marks in your exam. So make sure you understand them well, solve enough questions from the practice manual, and make sure you get a good hang of them. Thank you.